She fell apart again last night. First she yelled and then she cried. Today the makeup won't disguise how everything hurts. Pays the bills but pays no price for the way he's using up her life. It's easy to control a wife who don't know what she's worth. But she believes beyond reason he will be the man she thought he was. Abigail's dream was a night in the shining harbor, strong arms at night to hold her, not a fierce and angry warrior. Abigail's dream was a husband true and faithful. He'd be loving, she'd be grateful. Keep his dinners on his table, perfect he seems, so bitter, so sweet. Abigail's dream. She told the preacher, told a friend, hoping they would understand. We told her God would hold her hand until lay down here again. So feeling guilty and alone, she went back to her broken home and offered God a silent song with a promise and a prayer. She doesn't know the laundry and pretends all his sins are washed away. 'Cause Abigail's dream was a night in the shining harbor, strong arms at night to hold her, not a fierce and angry warrior. Abigail's dream was a husband true and faithful. He'd be loving, she'd be grateful. Keep his dinners on his table, how perfect he seems, so bitter, so sweet. Abigail's dream. Where's the hope in sacrifice? Jesus, come and shine your light. We need the truth to make it right, make it right. Abigail's dream is a night in the shining harbor, strong arms at night to hold her, not a fierce and angry warrior. Abigail's dream is a husband true and faithful. He is loving, she is grateful. Keeps his dinners on his table, how perfect he seems, so bitter, so sweet. Abigail's dream. Abigail's dream. Oh, Abigail's dream.
Hi, everyone. Did you love that song? It's called Abigail's Dream, and it was written by Kim McLean. I did a retreat with her, a women's retreat, and she was an amazing songwriter from Nashville. And I was working on my book on the emotionally destructive marriage at the time, and she shared her story about being in a domestic abusive marriage. And I asked her if she would write a song, and I gave her a copy of the book, and she read it, and she wrote a song for us for that book, and it's an amazing song, and so I thought I'd play it for you. If you didn't get a chance to listen to the whole thing, you can listen to it if you get the webinar replay. Really, really pretty song. It just captures the feeling that you have when you're in a destructive or abusive marriage. Hi, I'm Leslie Vernick. I am so glad that you are here with us tonight. And so where y'all from? We have a ton of people registered for this webinar. We had about 900 women and men, even pastors, show up this morning or at noon when we did the webinar the first time. I had a thank you note from a pastor, praise God, said, Leslie, you were spot on. So I was so grateful for that. And so where are you all from? Put it in the chat. I'm going to leave the chat open a little bit at the beginning so we can get to know one another. I will shut it off a little bit later. But let me just tell you a little bit about how tonight's going to roll, if it's okay with you while you're putting it in the chat. And then I just want to kind of look over and see who's here. Some of my friends from Lincoln are here in Delaware. Oh, in Canada. I was just in Canada last week. It was beautiful. We were in Ancaster, and I had never been in Ancaster right outside of Toronto, but it was quite beautiful. A little cold, but you know what? It's cold in Phoenix. You see me wearing a sweater. It's freezing this week. Usually it's in the hundreds here in Phoenix at this time of year, but it's been cold and windy. It's unusually cold. So Omaha and Louisville and North Carolina, another Canadian, thank you, from Maryland. Somebody said, can I watch this later? You will. I think you'll get a replay if you didn't come. I'm not sure if you get a replay. If you did come, you might. But if you didn't, you can email my assistant at martha@leslievernick.com and ask for one. Southern California, Ohio, Texas, Michigan, Australia. Welcome, Glennis. I know that it's a different time of day for you, but appreciate you being here. And Florida, Minnesota, great. Wow. Your first webinar. Welcome, Rebecca. I know some of you are like me and a little tech challenged. And so it was a big deal for you to figure out the link and press it. And I'm still figuring out how to do all this. And so I appreciate you coming. Another Australian, two more Australians. Yeah, we've been getting a group of people from Australia there, and I'm going to be doing, for those of you who might be in Europe, we're trying to do a little Conquer conference in London next May. We have some Conquer girls in London, but I would be open to coming to Australia for a little Conquer conference, and it would be little, but we would get together and do some teaching. But anyway, so welcome. I am so glad you are here. Tonight is going to be different because I'm going to teach you some things I have never really taught publicly. I've taught it to counselors before because it was important for them to learn it. But I think it's important for you to learn it now too, because I hear so many horrible stories of reconciliation attempts that fail. And it's just prolonging the misery and creating more heartache for the kids. And you don't know if change is really happening. And so I want to really help you understand when you can hope that change is really occurring and when you need to understand that it's just whitewash, just charm, and it's not really change. Your husband probably has a charming side. And let me just back up a bit. I understand that women can be abusive too. In fact, I was raised by an abusive woman. My mother was abusive. I started my whole journey in trying to understand what God says about abusive relationships because I was having a problem with my mother. And as a Christian and as a Christian counselor, I did not know how to have a relationship with this woman because she scared me. She threatened me. She lied about me. She verbally abused me. And how do you have a relationship with someone that you're afraid of, right? And I was afraid of my mother even as a grown-up. We could not have a good conversation. I was afraid to have my children around her. And so the confusion, forgive, honor your parents, overcome evil with good, overlook an offense, love covers a multitude of sin. All these Bible verses get messy in your head when you're trying to deal with the whole aspect of relationships and whether you can be in a relationship with someone or not, or if you have to be in a relationship with someone or not. And so I not only just figured this out professionally, I had to live through it personally. And I have come through the other side, and I have some really clear biblical guidelines for you on what God says about relationships, both how to keep them and how to repair them, because relationships do get damaged because of the messiness of sin. So I want to talk about that, but I'm going to take it for granted that most of you in my audience are women, and most of you are the victim of a destructive marriage, not all. So I do understand that there may be some guys in the audience. I didn't see any names here, but there may be some of you who are lurking who did not put your name in there. And that's okay. It's harder, even as a guy, to admit that you're in an emotionally abusive marriage. I have some guys on my blog and they've talked about that. So that's okay, but I'm going to be talking mainly as if the woman's the victim in my slides and all that. So don't email me later and say, Leslie, don't you know that women can be abusive too? Yes, I know that. but my ministry is primarily to women in destructive marriages. And just by some small chance that I have some people, some men who have been accused by their wife of being abusive, and you're lurking here, I want you to know that God has some very, very important things to say to you that could help turn your life entirely around if you're willing to humble yourself and listen. So I'm grateful you're here too. And I hope you stay to the end so that you can see that if you really want to repair your marriage, there is a path forward. But if you just want to pretend like you're repairing your marriage, but you really have no intention of doing the work, I'm going to show your wife what that looks like too, so that she doesn't get fooled. So are you guys ready to begin? All right, so fasten your seatbelt. I'm going to turn my screen off. I'm going to go over to the slides. I would highly encourage you to get a couple pieces of paper and a pen. I did not do a handout for you. It took almost every ounce of time and energy I had and the time I had to get this talk together and get the slides together. So I didn't have time to do a handout, but I do have a special bonus for you if you hang out to the end. So if you're all the way to the end, you'll see a link in the chat. Download that because it's for you. So you have to stay to see the link in the chat because I'll turn the chat back on. That link will go there and that will be your bonus for staying till the end. But I would encourage you to get a pen and paper because I'm going to talk about some things that probably you haven't heard before, at least not in this way. And I want you to really get the benefit of it. So while I'm switching over to the slides, you get your pen and paper and I will see you in just a minute. And then after we're all done, the webinar will probably take an hour. And then after I'm all done, I'm going to stay and answer your questions. All right, we'll stay for at least 60 or 90 minutes. This morning it was 90 minutes that we stayed and answered Q&As. So as long as I have a voice and I can keep myself upright, I will do that. I was so tired after this morning. I took a nap for about an hour and a half before tonight. So, and I also have a Diet Coke, which isn't good for you, but it's got some caffeine. So I should be good. Anyway, so let me switch over and I'll be right back. All right, hold on. Okay, I think we're ready. So tonight, what I want to do is I want to answer the question for you that I get asked all the time. How long do you keep trying? And if change starts to happen, what does it look like? And how will you be able to tell that it's real? So let's start. Does this sound like you? Are you feeling confused or scared, isolated and alone? Exhausted and tired of the drama? Maybe even a little defeated and depressed? Frustrated, angry, and uncertain what God wants you to do. And you're feeling helpless and powerless to know how to change your marriage or your man into something that's loving, stable, and safe. Which one is your biggest challenge right now? Where are you at? Put it in your chat. Where are you at in terms of these feelings? Isolated, scared, exhausted, angry, depressed? Where are you at the most? Put it in the chat because I just like to know what your biggest challenge is right now. And if you're any of those, you're in the right place. And so during this webinar, I'm going to show you how to go from where you are right now to an amazing life-changing shift. From trying harder to change your marriage and your man, from feeling confused about what God says you should do and feeling alone and scared and isolated and exhausted, to knowing exactly what path you need to take to reclaim your power and to invite your man into healthy change so that you can rebuild broken trust, so that will please and glorify God. Sound good? All right, so stay with me till the end because I do have that gift for you. All right, I see people are confused, all of the above, confused, angry, what else? Exhausted and grieving the loss, frustrated, depressed. Yeah, very depressed. All right, great. I'm so sorry. That is so painful. Yeah, and a lot of you are scared too. All right, so do yourself a favor, please, and turn off your distractions. Can you please turn off your cell phone? Shut down stuff, and I'm going to temporarily shut down the chat because I know that All of you are very intelligent, but you're not going to be able to chat and listen at the same time, and it's distracting to you. And I really do want you to hear what I have to say. So I'm going to do that right now. All right. And if you're not present, you won't be able to get what God has for you. And I believe that God has you here for a reason. He wants you to make that amazing shift. And so in case you have no idea who I am and somebody just gave you this link and said, you need to go and watch this, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Leslie Vernick. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, or I was for 35 years with a private counseling practice in Pennsylvania. Now I'm a relationship coach, and I'm the author of 7 books and numerous articles. I'm a national and international speaker. I received the 2016 American Association of Christian Counselors Caregivers Award. I've been a featured guest on Focus on the Family, talking about emotionally destructive marriages. I've been on Family Life Today, Moody Radio, and I'm a featured guest on the divorce care curriculum. You might have seen me there if you were going through a divorce. But my greatest accomplishment is that I've been married to the same good man for 44 years. I have 2 adult children, 3 amazing granddaughters, and 1 cute new puppy, Addison. I also want you to know that I have a high view of marriage, meaning I believe in the sanctity of marriage, and that marriage is to be a picture of Christ and the church, which is a loving relationship, not an abusive one or a destructive one. I also have a high view of Scripture, meaning I believe the Bible is the Word of God, and the Bible has the words of life. I believe that the Bible teaches us God's wisdom on how to do life and how to have healthy and happy relationships. And as I said, I have grown in this area, not only professionally, but personally, because of my relationship with my mom. I've also had the opportunity to travel to Romania and teach women who have been in destructive marriages how to get healthy and whole. I was in Iraq with a cohort of a psychologist and psychiatrist, and we were teaching other leaders in Romania as well as in Iraq mental health skills to deal with trauma in abusive relationships. I've been to Cuba teaching pastors and counselors in a master's program, believe it or not, in Cuba in Christian counseling. And also I recently was at the White House. But I believe that God has called me to speak up for those who haven't been able to speak up for themselves. And there's lots of different populations who have been in that place. But for me, the population has been Christian women. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. And I'm helping those very same Christian women learn to speak up for themselves and speak up for one another. So if you signed up for this webinar, you should have gotten a video. And if you didn't, you will. If he doesn't hit you, is it still abuse? It's a hard word to define, isn't it? Because James 3:2 says we all stumble in many ways, and sometimes we're guilty of abusive incidents. There is no perfect marriage. There is no perfect relationship. There is no relationship without some sin and some suffering. There's no perfect wife, and there's no perfect husband. So let me help you discern the difference between an abusive incident and an abusive relationship, and what constitutes an abusive and destructive relationship. But let's begin by talking about the difference between a difficult relationship, a disappointing relationship, and a destructive relationship. I'm going to do this pretty quick, but just briefly, a difficult relationship is where there's a lot of outside stressors pressing in on marriage. Could be job changes, financial problems, in-law difficulties, health issues, an autistic child, blended family. And it creates a lot of stressors that put the couple under pressure, and it kind of tests their maturity level. Are they able to deal with this conflict and this pressure together? Are they able to talk maturely about these things? Or does it result in them biting and devouring each other, as Paul talks about? And he says, watch out, if you keep biting and devouring each other, you can destroy each other. So difficult is difficult. It doesn't have to become destructive unless you don't have the emotional and spiritual maturity to deal with difficult. And then difficult can become harmful to the marriage if you don't know how to control your tongue and your temper. Disappointing is when the marriage isn't what you quite thought it was. And I think sometimes we romanticize marriage, and Hollywood and Harlequin have a big part of that. But the truth be told, no one gets all 52 cards in the deck. So maybe you married someone and you thought you were Barbie and he was Ken, like Beth Moore did. And she said, and I thought we were going to have a dream house. And when after I got married, I sort of wanted to go home to my mother, right? This person isn't exactly what you thought. They're not as romantic. They're not as ambitious. Maybe he doesn't think that you're as much of a good cook as he wanted or a housekeeper, or he doesn't have deep conversations. And these aren't necessarily at all sinful. They're not deal breakers, but they sort of make your marriage feel a little boring or less exciting than you hope for. And part of you maturing and growing up is to learn to love the person you married, not the person you thought you married. But a destructive marriage goes beyond disappointing. It goes beyond difficult. A destructive marriage violates the very personhood of the spouse. It undermines her confidence, her self-worth, her self-esteem, and systematically degrades, diminishes, and can eventually even destroy who God made her to be. Now, it's important that we understand that abuse and an abusive relationship is not about hitting. It's not about out of control anger. That's why the answer is yes. If he doesn't hit you, can it still be abuse? Yes. And let me tell you why. Because abuse, an abusive relationship, is not about anger at all. It's about control. An abuser wants control. And in a marriage, there is a gross imbalance of power and control. And it's also coupled with this attitude of entitlement. Now, Christians often don't catch power and control imbalances in a Christian marriage because of their conservative beliefs about what they think the Bible teaches about headship and submission. But let me ask you a question. Does the Bible and its conversations about headship and submission mean that an adult woman who gets married now has the status of a child who has to ask permission to make a decision for herself on what she wears, whether she goes outside or not, whether she cuts her hair, whether she reads a certain book or goes back to college, or gets a job, or visits her mother for a weekend, or talks on the phone to a girlfriend? Does headship and submission mean that a wife is not an equal partner and is treated more like a slave who is to have unquestioning obedience to her master husband? Now, I could spend a whole hour on this topic alone. And those of you who know my ministry, again, know that I do have a high regard for the scriptures and what the Bible says. And I've read the Bible from cover to cover lots of times. And it doesn't say headship means a husband gets to have his way all the time or make every decision or order his wife around. There's another word for that in the Bible, and it's called selfishness. It's called abuse of power. It's called oppressor. It's never called headship, biblical headship. Jesus, in fact, made it crystal clear to his followers that if you want to be the head of his organization or you want to be the head of a home, then you get to serve first. You don't bully to get your own way. Now, what strategies might a person use to get control over you or over his spouse? Well, obviously, physical power. If you scare someone enough or threaten to physically hurt them or those she loves when they don't do what you want, you usually get your way. And so when a husband uses his physical power to get compliance and control over you as his wife, understand he knows exactly what he's doing and how much you will let him get away with. But control over another person can be gained in other ways as well. And men who abuse usually know that physical abuse will never be enough to totally get control over you. So he'll have to also manipulate your mind and your will. And also, most men who abuse know that they can be arrested for physical abuse, at least in the United States. So a man will resort to other tactics to abuse and control his wife, verbal and emotional abuse. And God's word is clear about this. God says the long-term effects on verbal abuse is it's destructive to a person's soul, spirit, and body. Emotional abuse is in the Bible, and it is real. And the Bible and scriptures warn us not to use our words or our tongue as a weapon. Just read the book of James, for example. I remember working with a pastor, and one time he came to me for counseling because he was getting anxious and his confidence was being undermined by a couple of elders in his church who were criticizing his sermons every week. And he said, Leslie, every week I'm nervous about creating my sermon and delivering it because these men constantly tell me I'm not doing a good job. And just those verbal cut downs began to make him question his ability. And he said, I don't want to let these men control how I structure my sermon. But that's what was happening. They were getting control through the manipulation of criticism and verbal abuse over what he was going to say and how he was going to say it. Emotional abuse systematically degrades, diminishes, and eventually can destroy the personhood of the other. The Bible tells us this. The human spirit can endure sickness, but a crushed spirit, who can bear? And another way we get control over someone is sexual. How many of you have heard from your husbands you have no right to say no? I own you. Now, they're not going to say, I own you, but what they're going to say is, you are my wife. Therefore, you don't have a right to say no. Your body is mine to control. See, the Bible tells me so. Or what about economic? You can control a lot of things when you hold all the power financially. And so withholding money, hiding money, not treating you as an equal partner in terms of access to money, or making financial decisions with joint marital assets without mutual consent is an abuse of your power. And last, but certainly not least, is spiritual abuse. I mean, what better way to control a Christian woman than to use God's word to manipulate her to do what you tell her to do, under the guise that you're the head, or you're her authority, or even you are her God. And therefore, she must submit to you without question. To misquote Bible passages to get your way, to shame or degrade her. And some people have told me that spiritual abuse can be the worst form of abuse, because now God himself becomes the bully, the oppressor, and there is no one on your side, no one who cares about your plight. You're all alone. But I want you to know, if you're sitting watching this right now and you've been spiritually abused, despite what your husband or maybe even your church teaches, God is not a bully. He's not a bully. He's a lover. God is not an oppressor. And from the very beginning, he gave Adam and Eve the freedom to reject him and the freedom to love him or not love him. God doesn't force us into obedience or even into relationship. He wants a loving relationship, not a religion of rule keepers. Other ways you can make someone do what you want them to do is lie to them, humiliate them, crazy making talk where you start to feel like you're not sure what's going on. And other covert behaviors like gaslighting are quite effective at making a wife question her judgment or her decision making, her perceptions, and to lose confidence in herself as a competent, strong human being. And if you're sitting here right now and you're saying, I don't know, it's not that bad, don't minimize seemingly lesser types of controlling behavior, like 1,000 bee stings or paper cuts over time. It becomes destructive to the health of the marriage and you who are repeating the repetitive bee stings. I want to show you a power control wheel from a domestic violence organization that shows the various ways an abuser gains control over his victim. So let's start at the top, right by 12 o'clock. So they use intimidation. We've talked about that. Use emotional abuse. We've talked about that. Using isolation, criticizing your friends, not wanting you to go out. Don't you care about us? Aren't you just happy being with the family? I worked with a woman as a personal client, and her husband convinced her that she was being disloyal and unloving if she would have a girlfriend. He was isolating her from her family and her friends to gain more control, to minimize, deny, and blame for what they're responsible for, using children against you, using male privilege, using economic abuse, coercion, and threats. And what's not in there is the scriptures. All of these behaviors are sinful, and we can all be guilty of that. So that's why I want to talk about the difference between an abusive incident or even a controlling incident and an emotionally destructive or abusive relationship. Because when we do some of these things and our partner or even our child says, ouch, stop, you're minimizing that. You're not listening to me. You're trying to control me. I feel scared of you. You're intimidating me. When they give you that feedback, a relatively healthy individual will stop themselves. They will reflect on their behaviors, and they will not rationalize them or justify them or excuse them. They will repent of them. But when these behaviors are a regular part of marriage, they're a pattern, they're the norm, and there is no responsibility taken to change them. Instead, there's continued blaming and rationalization and excuse making. The relationship is abusive and destructive. And one more thing. When there's chronic patterns of deceit, dependency, and indifference to your needs as a person, the marriage is destructive, even if elements of obvious control aren't easily seen. For example, if you ask your husband for help with something, with the children, or even if you're having a medical problem. I remember one woman was digging in her garden and her husband was driving out the driveway going to a baseball game, and bees started flying all over her head and stinging her, and she's running down the driveway flailing, and he's driving out of the driveway laughing at her. What a funny scene, seeing your wife get stung by hundreds of bees. And she had to drive herself to the emergency room, and when she came home and her face was swollen, he never asked her how she is. You feeling okay? I'm sorry. Indifference is abusive when it's chronic. Financial indifference, spending large sums of money meeting your own needs or wants, but your family doesn't have enough to pay the bills or eat properly, or good medical care. Remember, in order to see if a marriage is destructive rather than just difficult or disappointing, we're looking for patterns. If you're a counselor, pastor, or church leader here, we're looking for patterns where you or someone you know are repeatedly dominated, deceived, dismissed, devalued, demeaned, or degraded. So let me summarize. An emotionally destructive marriage is one where your personhood, your dignity, and your freedom of choice is regularly denied, criticized, or crushed. And this can be done through words, behaviors, economics, attitudes, and yes, even misusing and misquoting the Bible. Did you know 1 in 4 Christian women report being in an emotionally destructive marriage? So let's talk about what marriage is biblically. And marriage is first a relationship. It is not just a legal agreement. And this is going to be crucial as we go forward because you're repairing a relationship. You're not just trying to stay together legally. It's a mutual and reciprocal partnership. And conflict, which happens in any marriage, involves solving a problem, not attacking a person. And damages, which happen in any long relationship, they're going to happen. Just like if you live in a house for a long time, you're going to have some damages. Any damages that happen are repaired through confession, repentance, restitution, and change. So let's for a minute just look at this word mutual. Because for a relationship to be healthy, there has to be mutual caring, mutual honesty, mutual respect, mutual responsibility for the care and the maintenance of the relationship, and mutual repentance when things go wrong. Now, not every relationship is mutual, but when it consistently lacks mutuality, the relationship is really more of a ministry than a relationship. Even Jesus had ministry relationships and he had mutual relationships of people he was closer to, like Mary and Martha and Lazarus, or Peter and John and James. They were closer than the other disciples like Judas. On the other hand, Jesus did mention when he healed the 10 lepers in ministry, and only one came back to thank him. His relationship with Judas was not mutual. And when Jesus sobbed about Jerusalem, remember he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would have gathered you together, but you would not." And he faced the heartache of loving someone who didn't love him back, of having ministry to someone with no relationship. The second important ingredient to healthy relationships, especially marriage, is reciprocity, shared power and shared responsibility. There isn't where one person has the power over the other and the other has all the responsibility to maintain the relationship. There isn't the relationship where one's the giver and the other is the taker. Now, the Apostle Paul talks about relationships in churches, and he talks about this balance of mutuality and reciprocity when he wrote to a church who was sacrificially giving of their money to help another church out. And this is what he said. Now, I don't mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, now your abundance at the present time should supply their need so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness or mutuality and reciprocity. You cannot have a healthy relationship, even with another girlfriend, if there isn't mutuality and reciprocity within that relationship, let alone a marriage. I mean, think about it. How would you feel if you had a girlfriend and you were the one who was always initiating that friendship, always contacting her, always paying for everything, always giving and serving and helping? You were a friend, but there was no reciprocity, no mutuality. How would you start to feel? Taken advantage of, resentful, like the relationship didn't matter to the other person, like it was very lopsided, like it wasn't a real friendship. And the last ingredient to a safe and trusting relationship is freedom. Now, if you're married, it doesn't mean that you have freedom to do whatever you want without any accountability. Not because someone's controlling you, but because you personally chose to limit those freedoms when you got married. Like you don't date other people, or you don't keep all your assets to yourself, and you don't do whatever you want with no accountability because that was your promise when you got married to be accountable, to care about your spouse and your spouse's feelings and hurts. But in a healthy marriage, you do need certain freedoms. And one of them is to be the person that God made you to be and not to be forced or pressured to be a person that the other person says you have to be, as if they're your God. One woman yesterday in one of my coaching groups said this. She said, "My husband told me, as long as you always make me happy and never disappoint me, we'll be fine." Who can live up to that? She's not free to make a mistake. She's not free to have her own opinions or needs or feelings. Anything that's different than her husband or anything that he doesn't want her to do, she's going to start World War III in her marriage. You need the freedom to speak up with your own thoughts and feelings. And you need the freedom to disagree in a respectful way. Now, many Christian men misdefine respect as unwavering and unquestioning obedience to whatever he says or whatever he wants. And if you don't do it, you don't respect me. And even if you see him driving the entire family straight off the cliff, you're supposed to be quiet and simply trust God. This is not the definition of respect, nor is it God's plan for marriage. If you are called to be your husband's helpmate, which you are, then you must have the freedom to give him feedback if and when his behavior is harmful to himself, to you, and to the family that God has given him. And if he restricts your freedom to do that under the guise of I'm your head, I'm your authority, and you need to respect me, so don't tell me anything I'm doing wrong, he is misunderstanding or misusing God's word. You must learn to speak up respectfully and speak the truth in love. God calls all of us to do this for one another, but nowhere is it more important than in the marriage relationship. So let me summarize. A healthy adult relationship, especially marriage, is one in where both people in the relationship give and both people in the relationship receive. There's a safe and open exchange of ideas and feelings and thoughts, and all perspectives are considered and valued. There's also the freedom to respectfully challenge and confront in order to strengthen one another and the relationship. I love how the writer of Proverbs phrases a healthy marriage when he says he trusts her or she trusts him to do him or her good, not harm, all the days of his life. Write this down. Trust creates safety, and safety leads to greater trust. And when safety and trust are shattered, the marriage relationship itself is broken, and without repair will eventually die, even if you stay legally together. Now, traditionally, most pastors and counselors have acknowledged trust breaking down in the area of sexual fidelity, but that's not the only area in relationship where trust breaks down or where trust needs to be repaired if the marriage relationship is to be viable long-term. For sure, a lack of sexual faithfulness and integrity in the sexual area ruins safety and trust in a relationship. But there are 4 other areas as well where trust breaks down. So let me just unpack these a bit. Honesty and authenticity. Can you trust your spouse to tell you the truth, even when it's hard? Is he the same person outside the house as he is inside the house with you? Or is it more Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde stuff? Or is he charming on the outside with other people and cruel at home? Does he shine and polish his image for all to admire, but behave treacherously toward you? If so, there is no trust in who your husband is or what he says. Therefore, for you, there is no safety. What about compassionate care? Can you trust your husband to care about your feelings, your needs, even your dreams and desires? Does he give of himself and his resources to show concern about your welfare? Can you trust him to do you good, not harm, all the days of your life? Maybe his abuse is more passive. I call it the sin of indifference, and trust breaks down. For example, you need help with the kids and you're not sleeping well because you have a crying baby to nurse, but he calls you selfish because he says he needs sex every night, and that takes priority over your need to sleep. And if you love him, of course you will meet his needs first. But what about your needs? Does he care about those? No, it's always about him and his needs and his wants. They always come first. Or let's say you want to use some family money to go back to college, but there's never any extra money for you and your dreams, only for his. Or maybe you just need his help. You wake up in the middle of the night sick. Please wake up. I'm having stomach pains. I think I need to go to the emergency room. And he rolls over and says, I'm tired. Call your mother or an Uber. These are true stories. You don't trust him to do some of the most basic things any decent human being would do, to care about your needs or your feelings. And therefore, safety is broken. Or what about reliability? Can you trust him to do what he says he'll do? For example, when he promises to pick up the kids from school, does he? And if he forgets, does he show remorse and take responsibility for his forgetfulness? And does he do what he needs to do to not repeat this problem? Or do you get the blame? Or does he make excuses for himself again and again and again? Can you trust him when he says he'll go to counseling or change, but he never takes action on those promises? Can you trust him when he promises that he paid that bill or filed those taxes or he'll put safety controls on the computer, yet it doesn't happen? And then when you remind him, he gets defensive and angry and he tells you you're a nag and get off his back. If you can't rely on what he says, trust is broken. And if you can't rely on him, no trust or no safety. And last but not least, can you trust him financially? And this isn't about trusting him to make a boatload of money, but can you trust your husband to be honest with your family money and give you a say in what is spent and even what is saved? Can you trust him to use money and credit wisely so that you aren't in a boatload of debt and you can pay your bills? Do you know where the family money is? Do you have access to the accounts? Do you know how much he earns? And if not, there is no financial stability and safety for you. And no trust, no safety. No safety, no trust. And you're going to hear those two words a lot right now because counselors and pastoral people helpers rarely address these other areas of broken trust or lack of safety. Somehow, to reconcile a marriage, you're just to put your brains back on the shelf and forget about all this and make the relationship work again. But when trust and safety had been broken again and again and again and again and again, I want to tell you something different. It's not possible. The Bible tells us that we don't trust everybody. We don't trust certain people because of their past behaviors. Here's a couple of examples. In Proverbs 25, it says, putting confidence in an unreliable person in times of trouble is like chewing with a broken tooth or walking on a lame foot. In other words, it's not smart. In John 2:24, it says Jesus would not trust them because he knew what was in their heart, or he knew all people. And Paul is warning Timothy himself about a man who did great harm to him. And he said, beware of him. In other words, don't trust him. Don't let yourself be guilted into feeling like a bad wife because you don't trust your husband. If he has broken trust, he needs to earn it back. Love is a gift. Trust, once broken, needs to be earned. So I promise you the roadmap required to repair damaged relationships. Now, I'm not going to be able to share with you in this short time together that we have left all the twists and turns that are on this roadmap, but I'm going to give you the basics so you will know whether or not you and your husband are on this roadmap, and if not, what you can do. Because you'll know whether the marriage is moving toward repairs or it can't be repaired. So first, let me start with what doesn't work. And you've probably tried all of these things already. But if by chance your husband or your counselor suggests one of these, I would encourage you to say no, because it doesn't lead to repairs. It only leads to postponement of more pain, more heartache, and actually can lead to more damage. So here are the few of the most common detours that you will be asked to take that never lead to real healing or change of the abusive patterns. I'm going to combine, let's start with a clean slate, and let's forgive and forget. Let's just forget that I hit you, or that I've had a sexual addiction, or I still do, or that I had a secret girlfriend for the last 5 years. Let's just forget that I've lied to you about most things our entire marriage because I love you so much and I'm sorry. So let's just wipe that slate clean and forgive and forget and start fresh. Let's not talk about the past. That's the past. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, if only it were that easy. So let me tell you why that doesn't work. Let's just start with a clean slate and forget the past strategy doesn't work because when your marriage is in a pattern of repeated and chronic sin, the past doesn't stay in the past. It quickly becomes the present again because it's happening again. Now what? You see, all of us, not just destructive people, but all of us are creatures of habit. And the best predictor of the future is the past. Therefore, even if you do try to start with a clean slate and forgive and forget, guess what happens? The same old patterns are still there and will continue to repeat themselves in the present if there's not a clear path and a clear plan to change them. Let me give you an example as a woman that maybe you can relate to. We all have an eating pattern that we engage in day in and day out, healthy or unhealthy. But those of you who may struggle with more unhealthy eating patterns, how many of you have ever said to yourself, or even to someone else, tomorrow is a new day. I'm going to wipe the slate clean from all the junk I ate today, and tomorrow I'm going to start fresh. Yeah? And how long does that good intention last? Not long. It doesn't last at all if you don't have a specific plan on how you're going to change your eating patterns into new healthy eating patterns and have help and accountability to carry them out long term so that new eating patterns and new habits are created. Another strategy that does not work is just superficial changes instead of really doing the deeper heart work. So now he's nice to you, charming, wants to help you around the house and with the kids, Now he's sorry and he takes you out to dinner, buys you flowers. He's willing to go to church. He promises he'll go to counseling. And these are all great things, and it makes you feel hopeful. Please don't misunderstand me. These nice things, I'm not saying they're insincere, but they won't repair the marriage any more than putting a fresh coat of paint on your bedroom wall will fix the crack in your foundation of your house. It might feel better in the short term to have freshly painted bedroom walls, but nothing has changed in the long term because the problem that broke trust to begin with has never been addressed or fixed. When I used to live in Allentown, Pennsylvania, there was a corporate office structure that developed a gigantic sinkhole, and the building started to sink into the ground, this whole huge building. And it was on the news, and engineers were consulted about what they should do to keep the building from sinking and falling. But the damage couldn't be fixed until the problem of the sinkhole was addressed. They could have shored up the foundation so they wouldn't have collapsed that building right then and there, but without addressing the sinkhole and whether or not the sinkhole was likely to reoccur, the building would always be fragile and vulnerable to collapse. In the same way, when marital trust and safety has been broken, doing nice things doesn't fix the sinkhole that fractured the safety and trust to begin with. And if that's not addressed, the lack of safety and trust are damaging the relationship. And the problem that broke safety and trust in the first place, the sinkhole, is still there, even if it's not obvious in the moment. Maybe the affair is over, but what was the entitlement thinking that it was okay to lie and cheat on you just because he could, or because he felt hurt or angry or disappointed? I have news for him and for you. There are a lot of husbands or wives who are in disappointing marriages, who don't cheat and lie on their spouse. They don't break trust, even when they're not happy or fulfilled, even when they're aggravated and frustrated. The last strategy, with one person doing the work, doesn't work because you have to work together. Both people have to be committed to change and doing the work of repairing damaged trust. Don't get me wrong, doing your own work is necessary, and I'll talk about what your work is toward the end of our webinar, but you can't fix damaged trust all by yourself. So what can you do? You can make a horrible, toxic, argumentative relationship that's happening in your home less so when you do your work. For example, you learn to control yourself, that you don't repay evil for evil, you don't retaliate or act sinfully when you're hurt and angry. A lot of you put you're very angry on that. So it's tempting to kind of deteriorate, to be an abuser yourself. So you can stop that, and it can make the environment a little better, especially for your little children who are watching. But you cannot make a bad marriage with broken trust a good marriage all by yourself. Now, I did send you a video on why you should say no to no more marriage counseling. And again, I hope you watched it. If you didn't get it yet, you will. And Monday, I did a Facebook Live on the topic, so you can go back and watch that. But the bottom line is this. Write this down. Abusive behaviors, chronic addictions, and chronic adultery are not marriage problems. They cause marriage problems because they break safety and trust. And so marriage counseling is not the best treatment plan for help at this initial point, because until the one who broke the trust and safety owns it and takes responsibility for it and understands the consequences of his behavior is broken trust and safety, nothing can change, because the root problem is never addressed or healed, because the root problem isn't the lack of safety or trust. That's the consequences of the root problem. All right, the root of abusive behavior or chronic addictions or adultery is inside the heart and mind of the one who broke the safety and trust to begin with. And until that is looked at and confessed and changed and addressed, safety and trust can never be rebuilt. So marriage counseling might be a great step after your husband does his own work to understand and take responsibility for why he acts the way he does, why he does what he does, why he thinks the way he does, and why he's been willing to break trust and harm you all these years. So what's the road forward? How do you work together or come together to create the possibility of a restored marriage? We're going to take two tracks here that have to come together. The first is you have to reestablish the basics of a relationship, which is safety and trust. You cannot have a relationship with someone you don't feel safe with. You might have to live with them like they do in a concentration camp or with prison guards, but you don't have a relationship with them. And restoring sanity to both the husband and to the wife. So I want to unpack what that means in the rest of our time together. Let's start with sanity. The Bible tells us that we're all changed by the renewing and changing of our mindset. God's word says we all lie to ourselves and we all need to change our thinking. But the destructive individual never thinks he needs to change his thinking. He thinks he's thinking right. And so in order for him to change, he has to begin to realize that he's not thinking properly. If your husband wants to repair broken trust or a better relationship with you, his thinking has to change about himself, about you as his wife, about marriage, and even about life. Because destructive individuals do not think properly or maturely. The Bible calls it a deluded mind. In Romans 1, it says that they've exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And when someone does this repeatedly, God gives them over to a deluded or depraved mind, he says. Now, I'm not saying your husband's mentally ill or not even intelligent. Some destructive people are brilliant intellectually, but they are spiritually and relationally deluded. Now, I don't have time in this short webinar to get into all the untrue ways these individuals think, but there's a lot of internal lies. But I'm going to share with you 3 huge lies of entitlement thinking that all destructive individuals believe. And the first lie is this: I'm entitled to do as I please with no accountability to you for what I do. Now, the book of Proverbs talks a lot about the thinking pattern of fools, and that's one of them. A fool repeats his actions again and again and again because they're not accountable and they take no responsibility. Most individuals know, at least at some level, this lie is not true, that they're not entitled to do what they want with no accountability. For example, even most destructive men wouldn't expect to come to work late every day, not complete tasks on time, day after day, and still expect a raise or a promotion. But in personal and intimate relationships, especially marriage, this lie prevails. I'm entitled to do as I please with no accountability to you for what I do. Now, how do you know whether your spouse believes this lie? Well, when you ask him questions about what he does, or you challenge his decisions or his actions because you disagree with him, what happens? If he believes this lie, then you will be silenced. You'll be controlled by his wrath, or his deceit, or his sarcasm, or even perhaps his spiritual sounding words, like, I'm the head of this home, don't question me. Or maybe his withdrawal, he's not going to talk to you for 3 months. You are punished if you challenge him and you try to hold your husband accountable for a decision or an action that resulted in harm or heartache for you or the family. Here's lie number 2. I'm entitled to the benefits and privileges of marriage, including your warmth and affection, including sex, with no responsibility for the way I behave or treat you. In fact, if you don't like the way I treat you, it's your fault that I act that way. Your feelings are not as important as my feelings are. You're my wife. I'm entitled to have whatever I want, regardless of how you feel or what I've done. And if you don't cooperate, there will be some price for you to pay. And lie number 3, when I mess up or make a mistake, first of all, don't talk about it. And second, there should be no negative consequences, especially if I say I'm sorry. But even if I do the same thing again and again and again, we don't talk about this. But if you, as his wife, start to wake up and start to have new boundaries or implement some negative consequences, what's going to happen? He's going to now accuse you of being the abuser and harming him. I can't trust you. You can't trust me. I can't trust you now. In other words, you become the bad person because you've said, I'm not willing to cooperate with this lie anymore. It's not true, but they're going to make you feel bad for calling him on it. He'd say, I hurt you, you hurt me. And he's flipped this around and made you feel like you're the mean one. You're the one who's unforgiving. You're the one who's abusive. And now you're mutually abusive. And sometimes even counselors go there. And this is where you start to feel a little crazy yourself. Wow, am I abusive too? Maybe I have been abusive because I've reacted negatively. Am I harming him by my boundaries or my consequences? Maybe boundaries aren't biblical. Maybe I am being mean and vindictive. The difference is you are reflecting on this. He never does. That's the difference between an unhealthy person and a healthy person. Doesn't mean you do it or never do it wrong. It means that when you do it wrong and someone calls you on it, you start to think about that. But is it wrong to set boundaries? Is it wrong to have consequences? He's telling you, yes, it's wrong because I'm entitled to do it without any consequences. So confusion starts to reign. And let me just address this thinking really quickly for you. When it says in Proverbs that marriage, when he trusts her to do him good, not harm, all the days of his life, and in the New Testament where it says love does no harm in Romans 13:10, that doesn't mean love never hurts. For example, in Proverbs, it says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. Or in the Psalms, it says, let a righteous man strike me. Let his rebuke be an act of loving kindness. Or to speak the truth in love. And so when you set boundaries or implement consequences for his sinful behavior, excuse me, you have to get clarity on the difference. You are not harming your husband for putting safety measures in place for you and your children's safety. Hurt and harm are not the same thing. It's like your 2-year-old saying to you, Mommy, you're harming me when you won't let me eat 10 cookies before dinner, or you won't let me kick you when I'm angry and throwing a fit. You should let me. Craziness, right? But here's where your sanity also comes in. Hold on, my computer's giving me pause. Here's where your sanity also comes in and needs work, because what's going on in your thinking that you've believed some lies yourself. For example, maybe that God's going to be disappointed with me or angry with me if I take a stand and put some boundaries down or consequences against my spouse's attitudes and actions. Or maybe even your beliefs that staying married is more important than my children and my safety and sanity. Or a godly wife should stay silent and protects her husband's name and suffers well for Jesus, no matter what. And I'm going to be doing some Facebook Lives in the next week or so on some of these lives if you want to unpack them a little bit more. So we'll have plenty of time to really learn this. But if your marriage relationship is to be a picture of Christ and his bride, the church, what are we describing? Does a marriage relationship that's broken and full of empty promises, of abusive attitudes and actions, deception, degrading comments, does that marriage glorify God simply because you stay together? Simply because you silently endure? Is that the picture of Christ and his bride, the church? Not in my Bible, and not in yours either. Is God asking you to lie and pretend and keep up appearances or the image of a good marriage when it's all whitewash and underneath it's full of dead man's bones? Does this glorify God? Does this help your husband? Does this help you or your marriage? Stop and think about that. Is this the picture that God portrays of marriage or his church? You see, your role as your husband's biblical helpmaker is not to prop him up to enable him to continue to sin and break apart your family and your spirit and your heart. It's much more risky and redemptive than that. And that's where you may need to do your own work to get clear and sane. That speaking up in love and speaking up against abuse and oppression and sin, and standing up for your marriage and even standing up for your man and who he's supposed to be in God is God's plan for marriage. And it's not being disrespectful or ungodly. Safety and sanity go together. Hear me. Without safety, there's no trust. Without sanity, there's no safety because you can't trust who the person is or what he says or does. Now, does that mean you don't love him? No. But unconditional love, which God calls us to, doesn't entitle someone to unconditional relationship. Jesus tells us, love your enemy. But that doesn't mean you trust your enemy or feel safe with your enemy or have a relationship with your enemy. You don't have a relationship with your enemy precisely because he's an enemy. He's harmed you, right? Jesus also says this, if your brother or sister sins, go point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen, you've won them over, meaning you've repaired the break in the relationship that sin caused. But if they will not listen, take others along so that every matter may be established. And if they still refuse to listen, Jesus is saying, here's how we repair things. We have to talk about them. Tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, now what? Treat them as you would a pagan. In one of the Bibles, it says a corrupt tax collector. The relationship changes. What does that mean? It means there's no safety or trust in that relationship. It's broken. Pagans and corrupt tax collectors were not to be trusted. Unconditional love does not equal unconditional relationship because marriage is not an unconditional relationship. No matter what you do, no matter how you treat me, I'll be able to stay in a relationship with you. I may be able to stay legally married to you, but I can't be in a healthy relationship with a believer or an unbeliever if there is no trust or safety because God didn't wire us that way. He doesn't even wire animals that way. They don't like to be in a relationship with people who abuse them, right? They growl at you. Nor does God even himself do it. Jesus didn't have a relationship with everybody. He loved everybody, but he didn't have close relationship with everybody like Judas or the Pharisees. Because God himself says in Isaiah, our sin separates us from him. And until we own that and confess that and repent of that, God loves us, but we don't have a close relationship. So why would he expect different of his people? Now, I think it's important real quickly that you understand what repentance is, because it's not crying your eyes out, nor is it making verbal promises of to do something different, because words don't necessarily lead to change behaviors. Remember the words I talked about before. Tomorrow I'm going to wipe the slate clean and eat better. Words are easy. Changed behaviors are not so easy, and that's why John the Baptist challenges us by saying this: prove by the way that you live that you have repented of your sin and turned to God. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like making amends rather than expecting a get-out-of-jail-free card or amnesty. Forgiveness doesn't automatically mean reconciliation, right? If someone abuses my child, I'm going to forgive them, but I'm not necessarily going to reconcile with them, or I'm going to give them any access to my child. I don't trust them. It means that I'm willing to take ownership for the pain I've caused someone. Remember when Zacchaeus, the little tax collector in the New Testament, came to Christ? What did he do? The very first thing, he said, if I've cheated anybody out of their money, I'm going to pay back 4 times. He was willing to take ownership for the pain he's caused, and he's took people's money that wasn't his. He was willing to be accountable for the damage he's caused, and he's willing to do the necessary work and grateful for the opportunity to make amends. No one told him he had to do it. It was in his heart to do it. He was willing to do it because his heart had been changed by Jesus. So what are some of the evidences of a change of heart that's going on as a result of repentance? Well, we see humility more than pride. We see a beginning of a willingness to learn and to grow versus a willful pride and an arrogant attitude. Nobody's going to tell me, quit trying to change me. No, I'm willing to change. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to grow. Grateful for the chance, the opportunity versus entitled. Becoming God-centered versus self-centered. It's not about him anymore. Love-filled versus fear-filled or anger-filled. And he becomes a giver instead of a taker. So when do you start hoping? And how do you start to rebuild trust? Remember, even if a person is sincere with their words, they totally intend to change. My friend and mentor Francois Fenelon says this: a persuaded mind and even a well-intentioned heart is a long, long way from faithful and exact practice. Words and good intentions are not the same as specific actions taken to show that they're serious. So when my friend Sue challenged me to run a marathon on New Year's Eve, she said, hey, I'm doing the half marathon in April. Would you like to run it with me? And I said to myself, oh my goodness, I've never run a race in my entire life. I'm 63 years old. That would be a good thing to put on my bucket list. Of course I'll do it. So I said I would do it, but it was a long way from actually being able to do it, right? So January, New Year's Day, I'm running on my treadmill, and guess how fast I could run, or how far I could run, I should say. Maybe about 60 seconds worth, maybe a block. And so I had to do exact and faithful practice day after day, week after week, so that in April, I did complete 13 and a half miles and a half marathon. I did the work required to do what I said I was going to do. You see, repeated breaks in marital trust require personal work, not just marriage work. The one who broke trust must learn to become self-aware. Why did I do what I did? Not blame other people. He has to take responsibility for why he acted that way and reflect on what's going on inside of him, examining why he did, so he develops better ability to control his emotions and his actions and correct himself when he sees his controlling behavior surface or he's tempted to abuse. If you want to build broken trust, you have to talk together about where the trust was broken. And it might have been in multiple places, like care, sexual fidelity, honesty, authenticity, reliability, financial stability, and safety. It might be all of the above. But for trust to be rebuilt, you have to see that safety trust has been broken, and rebuilding safety trust always comes before building any other trust. Because how can you be honest with someone that you're not safe with? So you can't be honest with him about the finances. You can't be honest with him about your feelings. You can't be honest with him about his unreliability, because if he's going to beat you up for it or he's going to be abusive for it, you're not safe, right? So safety trust has to start first. And if you don't feel safe with someone, you cannot have a close relationship with him, even if he's your husband. So how do you test for safety trust? Well, there's lots of different ways, but I'm going to give you one. Boundaries and your no. The quickest way to see if you have the freedom to be safe in a relationship is for someone to respect your boundaries. Nope, that's not okay with me. Nope, I don't like that. No, I don't want to have a conversation right now. No, I don't want to talk on the phone right now. Please, I'd like you to leave the house because I can see you're getting worked up and I don't feel safe. And if that's not respected, Oh, you're being so manipulative now. Oh, it's always about you, is it? Hey, I think our roles have been, and it's attacking and accusing. There's no safety. There's no change. Can you trust him that he will not harm you when he gets angry or hurt or frustrated or even anxious? Can you trust him that he's learned how to manage his negative emotions, even when he's disappointed in you, or that you won't do what he wants you to do? Is it safe for you to express your thoughts and opinions and needs without him retaliating in some way? Can you say no to him without a guilt trip, spiritual abuse, or manipulation? Can you count on him to be the same person in public that you live with at home? This is the next step after safety trust. Is he honest with you even when it's hard? Can you trust that he cares about your needs and feelings and goals as well as his own? Can you count on him to do what he says he's going to do? And if you remind him, he's grateful for a helpmate that reminds him instead of angry and defensive and just leave me alone. So let's look at this arc of serious change, of restoring sanity and safety. He has to now be accountable for how he behaves and how he thinks and how he acts or reacts. No more blaming. It's all your fault. He starts to take responsibility for his own thoughts, his own life, his own growth, instead of blaming you or depending on you to fix everything for him. And he understands that when he messes up, especially in relationships, there's negative consequences, and sometimes those consequences are permanent. So if you're going to move forward to build new history as a couple, so the old history is represented by the red arc, and the new history is represented by the blue arc, which is safety, all right? If you're going to move toward that, no one builds it perfectly, right? So what happens when he slips into some of his old habit patterns? Because we all slip, right? Even if you're trying to eat healthy, you still sneak a cookie once in a while. So his old pattern pops up, or he gets frustrated or scary, and he's not handling himself very well. What happens? Is he aware? Is he taking responsibility? Is he being accountable to you, to others? If he's not self-aware, is he receiving your feedback like, hey, you're scaring me right now. I have something to tell you. Are you listening? Is he listening? Because centrality of feedback is crucial in the rebuilding of trust process. And Todd Herman says high performers or good athletes are not afraid to look at the replay. Why? Because you grow when you look at what you've done wrong. But is he willing or defensive? Is he open or closed? Is he teachable or argumentative and prideful? Feedback gives you clarity and greater self-awareness, just like the mirror gives you feedback. You look in the mirror, ladies, every morning, right? And it gives you feedback. Yep. You better get that makeup out from underneath your eyes, or you better comb your hair in the back because it's sticking up straight, right? It helps you to see. It helps you to correct those mistakes and learn from them so you don't keep repeating them. The Bible says the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise person listens to advice. And Hebrews tells us, exhort one another day after day, as long as it's called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And friend, don't be fooled. Charming is fun, charismatic. He might be excellent with words, competent, affectionate. And you want to look for character. Is he honest, loyal, reliable with his actions, humble, and faithful? Old history, he's had a history of ignoring you, avoiding, taking responsibility, denying blame, blaming you, repeating the same cycle over and over again. If you're going to build new history, he's got to receive feedback. He's got to grow in his self-awareness, his ability to self-reflect, his ability to have self-control, and his ability to self-correct. What does new history look like? The ability to recognize and own his own problem, see clearly, the ability to receive feedback from others, to be accountable, respect and care for you, creating new safety and sanity, and willing to work hard over the long term. No more entitlement. When is change real? The accountability, responsibility, and consequences piece is different. Do you see him accountable to authority, to you? Do you see him take responsibility and demonstrate that in his actions? Do you see him accepting the consequences of his poor choices or his attitudes or actions without blaming others? Now, here's something really important. If I were to work with you individually as a client, we would look at all the incidents of abusive behavior, and you would begin to notice that after an incident of abusive behavior, he's usually pretty nice to you because he doesn't want to experience the consequences. So he's going to try to make you think that he's changed. But on the right-hand side of this abuse cycle is the honeymoon phase. It's a calm that lulls you into a false belief that, oh, he must get how much this really hurt me. He's not going to do it again. But that's not where you're going to look for change if he's truly changing. Where you're going to look for change and require change is in this tension building place where he starts to get worked up over something, whatever it is. Is it different than it used to be? Is he aware he's getting worked up? Is he taking responsibility to calm himself down? Is he doing what he needs to do? Or if you're saying, hey, you're getting worked up and you're scaring me, is he listening so that you have a boundary of safety? This isn't going to happen again, right? And if there's no change there, I don't care how charming he is on the right side, there's no change. And when you have practice with that and patience with the process, there can be some healing. So what will you do? Well, you might be kind of frustrated right now because my husband will never do that and he might not. Most men don't. So do your own work because you have work to do here. First, you got to stop pretending. You got to move out of denial and into the truth. You don't have a healthy relationship and you can't trust your husband. Now what? Well, put your marriage in its proper place. What that means is so many Christian women had been groomed to put their marriage as their penultimate, like I need this in order for me to be okay. And God says that's an idol. You need me to be okay, not your marriage. Right? And so put your marriage in its proper place. I'm not saying make it unimportant, but it's not something that you have to have in order for you to be okay. And if you do, then put it in its proper place where you need to be a God-centered woman and not a husband-centered or a marriage-centered woman. And then you do your work, build core strength. And I have a whole curriculum on this in a coaching group that I do, and you can learn about it in Conquer, CORE. You're committed to truth, open to learning, responsible for yourself, respectful toward others without dishonoring yourself, and empathetic and compassionate. So you don't want to be hateful and resentful, but you don't want to enable. And that's the trick of learning to be healthy yourself. You want to educate yourself on unhealthy patterns and healthy patterns so you don't feel so crazy and confused and so easily manipulated, and stop isolating yourself so that you can get the support you need. You also need to let go of the outcome of your marriage. You need to give it to God. A woman said, I can be a godly person, I can be a godly wife, but I can't make a good marriage all by myself. I want you to know that God does not care more about the sanctity of marriage than the safety and the sanity of the people in it. So what do you need to do? Margaret Wheatley says, without reflection, we just keep going blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful. So you have some decisions to make for yourself. What are you going to do from here? And maybe you're like, oh, I have no idea. So can I make a suggestion? I would really encourage you to join an educational and support group that I run called Conquer. Conquer can help you hear from God in a new way. Conquer can help you live from a place of strength and health, emotional health, spiritual health, and not desperation. Conquer will help you get stronger and more confident to stop being so victimized again and again. It'll help you steer clear of manipulative games and crazy-making conversations and give you the freedom from your own bitterness, anger, and resentment. And Conquer is a perfect fit for you. If you're a woman, I don't allow any men in Conquer, even if you're an abused man. Sorry, no men allowed. And you're sick and tired of being stuck and feeling helpless or angry. And you don't like who you're becoming in this destructive marriage. And you're ready to grow and become all that God has for you. And for a change, you're ready to invest in yourself. Shelley said this, today I'm no longer that wounded woman in a withering relationship, thanks to Conquer and the work of the Holy Spirit. I was wonderfully made and I'm wonderfully restored, and so is my marriage. Although both of us are still works in progress. I'm a woman of worth, a warrior, better equipped for emotional and spiritual battle in this world. I'm not crushed by my fears. I've conquered them. I'm not defeated by my circumstances. I'm victorious because I've learned to conquer, not cower. And Lori said that Conquer really helped me. I've struggled with guilt that I couldn't work on my issues very well while living with him. But I realized that sometimes we have to step away to get the bigger picture. I'm seeing myself clearer in what I need to work on. Thanks for the teaching. So let me share with you the very first step when you join Conquer. You're going to take a journey, and I'm going to walk with you. And we're going to go from awakening, which is where you are right now. Oh my gosh, this is me. To safety. What does it mean to create safety in your world? To clarity. What is abuse? What does God say about abuse? What are covert abusive tactics, and how do I protect myself against that? How do I get greater stability so I can stand on my own 2 feet and not be so dependent on my husband to affirm me and validate me because he never is going to? And how do I get strong? Because Proverbs says a woman is a strength and dignity, and she smiles at the future. How? Unafraid. And confidence. How can I learn to be the woman that God called me to be? So we're going to walk through those 5 steps in the first 5 weeks that you join Conquer, and I'm going to help you. Wanda said, this group has been a blessing from God at the worst time of my life. And the support has been phenomenal from women who get it. You need women like that because most people in your church don't get it. And she's thanking me for responding to Facebook because we have a private Facebook page, and we have phone calls. And she's saying, that's wonderful. And so we stay together and we work together. Kathy says, it's so helpful to know that there's so many others sharing my experience. Not exactly in every way, but it gives me the courage some days to face another day. Also, the resources available through the knowledge and experience of others on the site is absolutely priceless. And it is. I had a woman say to me the other day, she goes, this membership has been more valuable to me than 5 years of counseling, even her own personal counseling. When you don't know which way to turn, others in the group are a little further ahead of you. And the prayer support and the focus on doing the right thing, do your own work, even though it's hard or scary, is incredible. And so here's what you get when you join Conquer. So you're going to get an invitation to start your Conquer journey, which is a 6-step module. And then every month, I provide you and all the other Conquer members with 2 short video teachings about boundaries, about parental alienation, about how not to give your husband a list when you go to counseling so that he will just do it and check it all off and think he's changed when he hasn't really changed. All different, what separation looks like. So you're going to get immediate help to put some things in practice. And I take feedback from you guys in the Conquer membership of what you need to learn next. We also have 2 90-minute group phone calls every month, which are also recorded. So if you don't make it to the phone call, you can listen again and again. And one of the favorite things that we do on this phone call is I do role plays with you so that I can help you learn how to speak up for yourself and say it in the right way so that you can feel proud of yourself on walking in core strength. We have this secret Facebook page, and in the secret Facebook page, we connect with one another day and night and get support. And if you don't know Facebook and you need help, I have tech help to help you. And also you get some reduced prices on all my group coaching and my classes. So Lori says, I love your biblical teachings in all aspects, but the thing I appreciate most is when listening to me speak on the phone calls with others. I have the ability to respond to conflict with the toxic person in an effective way, and I'm helping other women learn how to do that as well. So imagine how you would feel if you could actually speak the truth in love and take responsibility for yourself to steward your life while being respectful toward your husband. Instead of letting control you, you start to control you. Recognize the destructive patterns and respond to them in a firm yet godly way. That you knew what boundaries were and you could establish them and implement consequences. And you knew how to make good choices and follow through with those choices. Decision making is a huge topic in Conquer, and we have a lot of videos on that. Learn how to use your voice and express it honestly, yet respectfully. And find the courage to say, I won't live like this anymore. In the Conquer membership site, you'll see it's easy to log in and gain access. You can just type your name in, and then you'll get the Conquer videos and the Conquer program, and you'll see videos with big buttons that are easy to read that you just press and you know where to go. And welcome videos, Facebook videos, everything is in there for you step by step to show you. So how would you like to feel the support and love from other women who know what your life is like and have your back, who can laugh together? And sometimes these women even get together, and we get together. Whenever I travel in the country, I always say, hey, I'm heading to Nashville. We're the Conquer girls. Let's meet for dinner. I'm heading to Virginia. We're the Conquer girls. Like I'm going to London next year. That's how I met the Conquer girls in London. I was in London last year for vacation. I said, hey, any London girls in Conquer, let's meet for coffee. And we'll pray for you regularly and teach you how to connect with God in deeper ways. So you probably wonder what this costs. And I kept it as low as possible. It's less than a cup of coffee a day. It's $27 a month for all of this. You can pay by the year, which is more convenient for some of you, especially if you don't want it on your credit card. You can use a store-bought card of credit and just pay for a year, and you get 2 months free. And you can cancel anytime with 30 days notice. Also, I have a fast action bonus for those of you who sign up today. If you sign up today, we're going to have a phone call on Friday right away to get you started. A 60-minute phone call. I'm going to answer your questions. And as soon as you sign up today, you'll get details about that. But also, we have some extra bonuses. First of all, I told you I'm going to walk with you with a Conquer journey with me and my team. And what that means is starting in June, like this is the end of May after Memorial Day, the first week in June, we're going to start our Conquer modules of the journey, at the awakening, the safety, all the ones that I showed you. And I'm going to be there with you. And we're going to go through them together. You're going to watch them. And if you even don't watch them, I'm going to do a Facebook Live privately on the Conquer Facebook page. We're going to talk together. We're going to work with the newbies. You're going to get to know all the other newbies. So you're going to start your community sense right away, and you're going to get help right away to begin to establish the safety and the clarity and the sanity and the stability that you need so you can move forward. Also, I just finished a brand new book called Before You Say I Don't. This is the first time it's even been offered because we just finished it yesterday. It's an ebook. It's written by me and Marianne Bedesti, who is a friend of mine, an attorney. And so many Conquer ladies have lawyer questions, and they have spent a fortune on getting legal advice, and sometimes really bad legal advice that has hurt them. And so this book has a ton of legal advice. What questions do you need to ask to find a good attorney? What are biblical guidelines for separation in case you need to go before your church? What are the verses that talk about consequences and not keeping company with wicked people? And all of the things that you might want to know are all in this book. And so it's free if you join Conquer. And also another book called Walking in Her Shoes, another ebook. And this is a compilation of some of the most widely read and commented blogs that I've written over the years about suffering and boundaries and consequences. If you're a reader, it's a way of educating yourself really quickly on these issues in short little articles. So I hope you are going to decide for yourself, hey, I'm worth it. I need it. And I'm going to begin today my Conquer journey. So if you want to join Conquer, there's a sign up for it. You can just go there. And if you sign up today, don't forget, I will talk to you Friday at noon Eastern time. And you will get information from Martha about that. And I would love to see you there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the chat on, and I'm going to come back on screen and answer your questions. So hang in there with me. If you have stayed to the end, there should be a link somewhere in the chat when it comes up to an amazing quiz. Are you in a healthy marriage? It'll really help you see the areas that you are, you aren't. It's not the same test that was in the book, but look for it on the thing. So hold on, I'm going to go back to where I need to go. And I'm going to enable the chat so you can get started. There we go. And then I'm going to turn my screen share off. And I'm going to turn my camera on. And voila, I am back. I'm so happy that I didn't press the wrong button. Once I did this and I just shut us all off. So I'm more careful. So was it helpful? Give me some feedback in the chat if you found that helpful. What was your aha moment? Like, what was it like? Oh my gosh, yes, this is what I needed, or this I never heard this way before. That would be helpful for me. If you had an aha moment, I would love to just hear what that was. And please type in your question. There's the bonus quiz. I see that in the chat. So if you're here, you get to download that for yourself. And I would love to answer your questions. I am here for you right now. So if you had a question on what we talked about in the webinar, if you have a question about Conquer, I would be happy to answer it. You know, it was so funny. God called me to start this group because I had been doing so much counseling with women or coaching with women. And they'd say, well, how can we stay in touch with you? How can we stay in touch with you? And I thought, oh, I don't know. And so God just led me through a wise mentor to say, you know, I think you need to start this online support group. And I thought, okay, if we could get like 20 women, it would be okay. I could, do it. And it was like 20 and then 50 and then 100 and then 200. And we've had 2 big women's conferences, Conquer conferences. We hope to have another one next year. Last year we were in Lincoln, Nebraska. We had 900 women. Now they weren't all Conquer members. We opened it up to the public. But I'm almost thinking for our next conference, I'm almost thinking maybe we will limit it to just Conquer members. I don't know. But I love that you can get together and you can talk real. You can talk real. We don't have to pretend church. We can talk real God stuff, but we don't have to pretend that we're better than we are. We're further along than we are. And this is what Conquer does for you. It really helps you to get honest with where you are. Stop blaming any people for where you're at. You got to work on you. All right. It's not your husband's fault now where you are. It's you have to work on you because he may have caused some issues, even trauma for you. Let's say that you've been traumatized by some of the stuff that's happened in your marriage. Okay. So what are you going to do about your wonderful life? I gave this illustration this morning in the webinar that your job is to be responsible for you. No one's going to guard your heart but you. No one's going to keep you safe but you. No one's going to renew your mind with God's truth but you. Just like no one's going to brush your teeth for you but you, right? No one's going to take your bath and comb your hair but you. You're responsible for that. You're responsible steward. So if God gave you this gift of you and he said, this is who you are. I see who you are. And he gives you this little acorn. And he says, this isn't really an acorn. This is just the seed of who you are. You're really an oak tree, right? You're really an oak tree. And you give this seed of who you are to your husband to stomp on and crush or hide in a drawer says, I don't want you to be an oak tree, therefore don't be one. Is that what you're going to do? Are you going to let your husband decide? When God said, this is who you are, become that. And it threatens his ego, or he doesn't like oak trees. Are you supposed to be what your husband says you're supposed to be? Or are you supposed to be who God called you to be and let go of the outcome of your marriage? Because maybe just being who you're supposed to be is the best thing your husband needs to see, so that maybe he can be who he's supposed to be, because right now he's becoming a deformed man through his abusive lifestyle and the lies that he believes. Don't help him do that. That would be the worst thing you could do for him and for you and for your marriage if you really want a marriage relationship. All right, I'm going to answer some questions. Her moment of aha, how to watch for sincere changes in your husband. How do you know where change is real? Good. Thank you. I'm so glad. Oops, going to go back down. I want to see that one. From Australia. I purchased, let me just see this. Okay, if there's any question there. Good. I hope that you do a support group for men. Yeah, that would be great. I've been out 5 years and need to hear this so I don't get caught up in destructive friendships. This is really important. So one of the things that makes my work and my ministry unique for women in destructive marriages is if you go to some other online groups or even a secular group, a lot of it is about bashing the abuser. Like, oh, he's a narcissist, oh, he's borderline, or she, whatever. And it's not about doing your own work. Other than getting safe and getting out of the marriage, it's not about doing your own work. But you can see how easily this happens with friendships. You're allowing yourself to be manipulated and controlled. And so God wants you to mature. He wants your husband to mature too. That is his will. So I want to help you mature. And in the back door, maybe as he sees you mature, he will mature. Maybe not. We don't have control over that. But don't not mature because he won't. That's not what God would call you to do. Where can I learn more about chronic indifference? I talk a lot about that in both books, The Emotionally Destructive Relationship and The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. And I think it's a really important element of a destructive relationship, because in a relationship other than parent, chronic indifference with a girlfriend, you just realize she's not really a girlfriend, right? So you just cut ties. But one of the worst forms of childhood abuse that they're finding now is neglect. So when a parent expresses chronic indifference to a child, you're not important enough for me to discipline you. You're not important enough for me to invest in you. You're not important for me enough to even look at you because I'm busy on my phone. They're finding this is causing a lot of problems for young children. Even for those of you who have young children, let me just give you a warning that study after study is now showing that babies are being really impacted by internet, by their mom's internet use. Because before we had cell phones, when a baby was being fed, either bottle or breast, this is how you would feed the baby. Oh, so cute, and you're feeding them and looking at them and they're looking at you. And that eye contact is really important for a baby to feel safe and establish a bond with their mother. Now, mothers are feeding their babies like this. And the baby has no eye contact. And it's creating a world of anxiety in our children and anxiety in us. And so it's really important that we understand that neglect, indifference, I don't care about you, you're not important to me, is huge in terms of damaging our development for children. And when you're in a marriage, there's this there's a promise that we'll care about you. And when there isn't, it's extremely painful. And that's where you have to start detaching. And I talk about that in Conquer. How do you put your marriage in its proper place? How do you realize that his treatment of you is not a statement about you any more than a parent who neglects their child? Is it a statement about the child? It affects the child, but it's not a statement about the child's value or worth. And that's where you have to get your head straight and you have to learn sanity, because you can start to take it personally. Like my mother, my mother was neglectful. When she separated from my father, there were nights she didn't come home at all. And I'm, the babysitter, and I'm 10 years old. So it was scary. So there was neglect, but there was also abuse, but her abuse was not about me. It affected me. But one of the things I had to learn is just because my mother doesn't love me doesn't make me unlovable or unworthy, right? Just because your husband doesn't love you doesn't make you unlovable or unworthy. And that's where we get messed up here in our mind. And so this is what Conquer helps you do, is to get clear in your own mind so that you're sane, you know how to get safe, and you know how to have good relationships. And even Conquer, we've had to practice having healthy relationships, because sometimes we come into Conquer, we're not so healthy, and we take things too personally, or we overreact and we say hurtful things on Facebook, and we have to self-correct, and we have to self-control, and we have to kind of go back and repair those relationships. The very things that we're teaching you about marriage, we have to practice right in our own group, because this is life. Things get messy. It's not all perfect. And so, but to learn that and say, how refreshing is that I could make a mistake and I could just say, I'm sorry. And the other person says, good, let's work it out and we're fine. It's good. And so I hope you have the opportunity to experience that by joining Conquer. I'm being deposed by my husband's lawyer next week, and will be asked him why I won't participate in marriage counseling. What is the best way to answer that without sounding like my husband is the main problem? I don't know enough, Lauren, to know what your issues are, to know. So I would say a couple things. If you've had a ton of marriage counseling in the past, I would just say, been there, done that. It hasn't resulted in any change. I don't see that as our first step. I think each of us need to do our own work. So you could say that very generally. If you haven't done any marriage counseling, and there has been physical abuse, do some research on the internet. There's research that says marriage counseling with an abuser is contraindicated, because I'm not safe. I'm not safe to tell the truth. I'm not safe to say what really happens in our marriage, because if I go home, there's an incident, right? So that would be another reason why you wouldn't do marriage counseling. But probably the two other reasons is that, and I'll talk about that in the video, whether you can say this or not, in abuse or chronic adultery or addictions are not marriage issues. They cause marriage problems. And so I think you can say, I'm at some point willing to do marriage counseling, but my husband's never really done the work about his addiction. His sexual addiction is not a marriage problem. It's certainly caused problems in it, but he needs to do his work on his sexual addiction. We can't repair this if he's still a sex addict. Or my husband's been, physically abusive, and that's not my fault. He does that, and that's not a marriage issue. And so I don't see the appropriateness of marriage counseling before he does work to figure out how to control his temper and not be so controlling over me. And until he does that, there's no repairing of the relationship. And the third reason that we don't do marriage counseling is that oftentimes the abuser is not really a client. And I talk a lot about this in the video. So if you have two people in counseling, it doesn't mean both are willing clients, right? You have one person who's an observer, one person who's watching, one person who's making sure you're not saying anything you shouldn't be saying, but they're not really there because they feel like they have anything to work on. So if worse comes to worse, what you could say to the attorney or to someone is, I don't think my husband really feels he has anything to work on in marriage counseling. He hasn't expressed any goals or anything that he thinks he needs to change. It's always me. So I don't think that marriage counseling is appropriate because he's not really going to be a client. Let me share with you what happens, though, in marriage counseling that becomes very destructive to you. So I was working with a couple before I knew I shouldn't do marriage counseling. I've made all the mistakes. That's why God has given me the wisdom to learn from my mistakes, because I made them. I was working with a couple. He was in a church. She was a homeschool mom, had 4 or 5 kids. She wasn't real likable. She was kind of cold and frustrated, and she was kind of in an angry place with him. She was a Martha kind of woman, so she was always very busy, and she didn't, she was abrupt a little bit in her conversation. So this sometimes gets tricky because marriage counselor is affected by people too. So she wasn't as likable as he was. He was very vivacious, very charming, very gracious, very complimentary. Of course, a narcissist is going to comment you so that you are, love bomb you so that you are brought into that circle. And so he was doing all that. So I liked him better than her, but I was aware enough of what was going on. And there were some levels of physical abuse, not hospital kind of physical abuse, but he pushed her one time, he threw her to the ground one time, and he spit at her one time. So that was what brought them to counseling. Why? So here's what happens in marriage counseling. So he would say, it was wrong. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done it. But let me tell you why. All right. So he's going to tell his reasons why. All I want from my wife is some attention. Every day she's over busy with the kids. She's always doing their homework. She's homeschooling them. I get that. I'm not asking for an hour every day. I just like her to sit down with me for a cup of tea in the evening, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but she's just too busy for me. She doesn't have the time for me. And it just drives me crazy after a while. I can't take it anymore. I'm so lonely. I'm so frustrated. Leslie, is there anything wrong with me just wanting a little bit of attention? So in a normal marriage counseling situation where there's never been any history of abuse, great question. And you might turn to the wife as the counselor and say, Like, tell me what's going on with you. Why are you avoiding having attention with him? And the reason that's a mistake is now she's the problem. He acted that way. No, he acted that way because he wanted to, right? And he chose to. Yes, was she a perfect wife? No. Did she have some things to work on? Yes. I'm not going to work on it with her in front of him because I don't want him to think, see, Leslie sees you're the problem. You just drive me crazy. That's why I do that. So this is what I said to him instead. Most marriage counselors would not do this because they don't see it that way. Because they see her as being deficient as a wife, no matter the poor guy, right? So I said to him very lovingly, so you are so hurt that your wife doesn't seem to want to spend time with you. She's busy with the children. All you want is 10 minutes of her time every night, and she can't be bothered. And it's so frustrating to you. Yeah, and he's kind of tearing up and weeping a little bit. And I said, okay, so what happens to you when you don't get what you want? And his face changed. That's the question, right? Who gets what they want every time? Right? From your kids, from your husband, from your wife. Is abuse the answer? Is abuse legitimate? No, ever, never. Is adultery legitimate? She didn't give me sex when I wanted, so it's okay for me to go cheat? No. Even for those of you who are moms, we probably do it sometimes, right? You're not obeying me. I just want you to listen to me, so I'll shriek you and scare you till you do it, right? And we all fall into that mindset a little bit, but when we do it consistently and in a pattern, we're not thinking properly. It's nobody's fault that we act the way we do, but ours. And if we can't control ourselves when we're hurt or disappointed, we have some growing up to do. Jesus says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Not everybody who's disappointed and angry abuses someone else. And so this is why marriage counseling doesn't work, because it's so tempting to turn to and especially if I read that whole list of how you're doing right now, you're depressed, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're scared, and you go into marriage counseling that way, you don't look so good, right? You look a little bit cray-cray sometimes to the counselor. And so you become the target of the counselor because he's not a client and you are because you're such a mess. And so he's thinking you're the problem. And that's not a good thing. I hope that helped you without knowing more specifics. What is the difference between Conquer and the core class you hold twice a year? Okay, so Conquer is a year-round membership. You get to be a part of the Facebook group. You get to be a part of the fellowship. You get to those videos every week. You get the Conquer journey. I have people who are mostly both. So out of Conquer, then I offer different, more intensive. So Conquer is not a psychological, it's an educational and support group, right? I have been a counselor, so I can educate you pretty well on these things, but it's an educational support group. We don't do group coaching or anything like that in Conquer. Huge support, huge prayer support. We have prayer lists. We're just on it, and you have support all the time. But when I offer smaller group coaching, it's very much more intimate. There's maximum of 20 people, usually 5 or so drop out. So there's 15 people on a group call. I get to know you. I get to know what's going on in your life. You work with me individually for 6 sessions or 12 sessions, depending on the thing, with the group. And it's different because it's much more in your life, in your situation, specifically week by week, by week, by week, by week. So of course, that's going to be far more expensive than just the educational support group. So this is often the entry place where a lot of women come in just to kind of put their toe in the water and give themselves a bit of nourishment. And then they say, wow, this is really helpful. And they might want to do more then and take the group coaching. That's where I give Conquer members a discount for that. We also, open it up to other people who have asked about my coaching. So that's what's the difference. Since women have the opportunity to grow and conquer, what do you suggest for the husbands? Is there a certain program or book or guideline? He's acknowledged that he needs help. Where does he start? Wendy, that is a great question. So my colleague, Chris Moles, is doing some work with men, but he's getting more requests than he can handle. One of the things that he might start with is an abusers group. Most counties have them. It's not a Christian group, but he can go to a, volunteer. They're usually educational groups on batterers or domestic abuse. Talk a lot about the controlling and have that power and control wheel and how you use all these things and how you make excuses and justify. So at least he's getting a sense of that. He can also pay for individual therapy, but he's got to be honest. And this is what happens is oftentimes when a man goes individual therapy and the therapist knows nothing about abuse and he's not really disclosing, he's saying, my wife won't just sit down and talk to me for 10 minutes. I just don't get it. And he never says, I pushed her, I hit her. He's talking about his pain. He's not talking about his bad behavior. He's talking about his pain. And the counselor's being very empathetic, but they're never really getting to the problem because the man's defining the problem differently than you are. Would it be helpful for my husband to listen to this webinar? If you trust that he won't hurt you with it, yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with him listening to the webinar. You'll have a 48-hour or 96-hour, I don't remember, 72-hour maybe replay opportunity, and then you take it down. But yeah, I think that men who genuinely want help appreciate this. I get, if you read my reviews on Amazon, it's really interesting to see the male reviews. So she doesn't know what she's talking about. She ruined my marriage, so they're not taking any responsibility. They probably didn't read the book, but there's a few who've read the book. And one that's particularly poignant where he said, I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in God, but this was the most helpful book I have ever read about what I do. And thank you that she gave me hope that I could begin to change. So, I think a man who really wants to change can work on changing, but it's not easy and it takes time, and it doesn't happen without accountability, responsibility, and consequences. Can you talk more about an abusive situation versus an abusive relationship? He always refers to ancient situations that I have tried to transform and repent for. How do you respond without sounding defensive? So I'll just share with you my own story. So I told you I was abused as a child, and I abused my son one time. I didn't mean to. I didn't, intend to do that, but I was frustrated with him because he was throwing a fit in the dressing room when he was 2, and I was trying to get new clothes because I finally lost my baby belly. And of course, little boys love being in the dressing room with their mother, right? So he's throwing a fit, wanting to go home, and he embarrassed me in the dressing room, and I wanted to get him to shut up. So he wasn't shutting up quietly, like, shut up. And so I grabbed him by his little arm and, shook him real hard as he was flailing on the ground and got him to his feet. And then he goes, Mom, you broke my arm. And his little elbow was dangling from his arm. Okay. And so this was an abusive incident. All right. He didn't make me do that. He was misbehaving, and I was responsible to be the parent. And I reacted negatively, abusively. I owned it. I didn't lie about it. Went to the hospital, told the doctor what I did. Thankfully, it was before the days when they had to report you. And he popped his elbow back in, so his elbow wasn't broken. He said, hey, this happens sometimes to kids, and so you're going to have to learn how to do it. So he showed me how to pop his elbow back in, and his elbow actually popped out a couple more times just when he was playing or wrestling. So I felt less guilty about it. But in the moment, I thought, oh my gosh, I could be just like my mother. And so I had to take ownership of that. It was an abusive incident. It never happened again. I owned it. I took responsibility for it. I worked to never repeat that. And so that may happen because we are sinners, and we have sometimes been in environments where we don't know any better and we react to something hurtfully. And when we apologize and so what I would tell my kids is, hey kids, like even yelling they didn't like. And so I would say, well, you have permission to tell me, you're scaring me. And as soon as they say, Mom, you're yelling, and I didn't think I was yelling, but they say, you're yelling. And I'd say, okay, I'll stop, time out. And so I was hearing their feedback, right? That feedback loop, because I'm trying to build new history. I don't want to have a history of them seeing me that way. And so, but if you haven't repeated that, I think what you can say to your husband is, here's where it takes 2 to rebuild trust, right? So if someone has broken trust with an affair or whatever, and it hasn't repeated, and they're sorry, and they've done their work, then you've got to decide, is trust on my end possible to work on? He's done his work. I got to do mine. I've got to forgive. I've got to start taking chances. I'm not going to be reckless with my chances. If he hasn't done his work, I'm not going to trust him. But if he's done his work, do I want to trust again so we can see if we can rebuild this relationship? If you aren't willing to do that, then you can't have a relationship. It takes 2 to rebuild the trust. And so if he isn't willing to trust you again, if you've been trustworthy and you've earned back the right for him to trust you again, and he's not willing, then it might be time to call it and say, well, I don't know how we can have a relationship if you can't trust me anymore. And that might be the permanent consequences. I just worked with a woman whose husband was very abusive toward her for years sexually, to the point of injury and all kinds of stuff. It was just like, you have to give me what I want. And finally, apparently he's woken up and he's not doing that anymore. But she's like, I don't want to sleep with you. I don't want to live with you. I don't want to be like having to live with your rapist. Why would you want to do that? So the consequences are permanent. She will never trust him again. Just like if you drink and drive and you kill someone, The consequences are permanent. That person's never going to trust you again because they're never coming back to life. The marriage is dead. So I don't know if that happened to your marriage with what you did. Sometimes sin is sin, and it's serious. It kills people, whether it kills your marriage or kills trust or kills a person. And so the consequences are real. But I do think that you should have a conversation with your husband if it's not been a pattern, and to say, this was an incident, not a pattern. And I've repented of it. What's holding you back from trusting me again? And see what happens. To what degree do you deal with the trauma of covert narcissistic abuse from long-term marriage in the process of divorcing? Well, it's interesting. We're going to be doing some Conquer videos on this. So I think that you have to do your own work. And so one of the things I say in Conquer, we have this little phrase. You're waking up and then you're making a decision. Am I going to stay well for now? And staying well doesn't mean you're going to have a happy marriage. It means I'm going to stay in the house with him to parent our children, to see if things can change, all kinds of decent reasons, but I'm going to stay well, meaning I'm going to do my own work. I'm not going to stay and have a nervous breakdown. I'm not going to stay and start retaliating against him. I'm not going to stay and be drinking all night because I can't stand it. That would not be staying well, right? So if I'm under so much trauma from whatever happened, I need to get help for me. Whether the relationship is going to survive or not, you don't know, but you can't even go there until you get your own oxygen mask on first, right? I mean, the relationship is after you get healthy. You can't have a healthy relationship without healthy people. And so do your work. And even if you're getting divorced, do your work. Now, there's a lot of work to do with divorce, just the mechanics of it all, and the separation of assets and the finances and getting a job and all that. So give yourself some grace for seasons of work. And there's grieving and all of that. But you have to do work. And, we've had women in Conquer who have had a second marriage, and they've said, I didn't do my work. And guess what? I found another one just like the first one because they didn't do their work. And, they were so eager to be in a relationship again. They didn't do their work in making sure that this relationship was healthy and that they were healthy enough to recognize that the relationship was healthy or not. And so, yes, divorce is traumatic in and of itself. But if you've been traumatized in your marriage, then it's important for you to do your work. And there are ways that you can work on trauma. In the Conquer library, we have a couple of videos on post-traumatic stress. I'm going to be doing a video on post-traumatic growth sometime this year on what does that look like, because it's really important in my work that you not stay in victim mindset. Victim mindset is this powerless, helpless, I need someone to rescue me mindset. And trauma makes you feel that way, right? And so it's very important that you begin to shift your thinking, and that's that sanity piece that you have work to do, to shift your thinking so that, wait a minute, I've got to work on my trauma and my stuff. I can't put that on someone else. Nobody can fix me but me, and I've got my work to do. Can someone benefit from Conquer if they don't want to go on Facebook? We do have some ladies who do not want to go on Facebook, and that's fine for a number of reasons. Technology, they don't want to ever have their husband seeing anything. Legal reasons where they feel vulnerable that way if they're going through a divorce. So we try to keep your confidentiality as much as we can. We do everything we can, including allowing you to join Facebook under a fictitious name, as long as we have a personal interview with you to make sure you are who you say you are. But totally. So the other benefits of Conquer is that you go through the Conquer journey, you watch videos from your computer, you can be on the phone call, you never have to say a word, you can just listen to it if you want. And there's tons of information in the Conquer vault, I call it, in the library, over 80, 85 videos. They're not real long, so they don't become cumbersome to I have to sit here for 45 minutes. Most of them are 10 to 20 minutes max. And you always can download a handout so you can take notes. And it's just one little step, like how do I make a decision? One little step of that. How do I deepen my relationship with God? How do I know He's truly sorry? Just different, one little step, one little step, one little step. So you're not overwhelmed with this whole big process, but just each step on a subject that you want. They're all indexed so you can find them easily. And so yes, I think you can benefit from Conquer. I would at least try it and get the free stuff and benefit from that. And again, you can quit anytime. So it's really $27, not a big risk, is it? You're not going to waste the money unless you do nothing. And even that is going to tell you something about where you're at, that you're not ready to take responsibility for your own learning. I'm wanting to get a breast reduction to help with the constant back and neck pain. My husband wants to be in charge of what size I can go down to. He says that he will not be attracted to me with smaller breasts. I feel that this is my decision, and I agree. Yeah. And, So I think this is a place where you have to say, I will think about what you have to say, and hopefully we can come to a decision that works for both of us. But ultimately, it's my decision about how big my breasts are going to be. Which one? Okay, so early in our marriage, I was equally destructive. I expected him to fill my needs and responded to his neglect, anger, sexual manipulation, etc. Over the years, I've confessed my sins, how I attacked him rather than responded well. My question is this. At this point, 27 years, he is still the same as when we got married, blaming for his blow-up, saying, why can't you just, when I express hurt over his sin? Since I've caused some of his hurt with my own sin, at what point is it okay for me to say enough to his continued abuse without sounding like I'm not willing to own my destructive damage from the first years of our marriage? Great work, Michelle, that you've done. I think this is what is really important, that we understand that, we may be also co-contributors to some of the damage. But here's where it's really hard, because you've matured, you've grown, you've said, I am responsible for me. He hasn't. And so the gulf is getting bigger and bigger, right? And he's doing what you did. You're responsible for my pain, and not anymore. He's responsible for his pain. So he hasn't done the work. It's like me saying my mom's responsible for my pain. My mom caused a lot of pain, right? My mom caused a lot of pain, but I'm responsible for my healing because she's not going to do it. I got to do my work, and he's got to do his work. Here's an illustration that you may want to use for him if you have a conversation at all. I don't know. Or even just for yourself, for those of you who haven't done your own work. And I used to use this with my counseling clients. Let's say that as a kid, your parents were neglectful or even abusive, and you fell or they hurt you and you broke your arm. And your arm was broken, but they never got you treatment. And you knew your arm was hurt and it wasn't working right, but you could never speak up because they would yell at you and you were just a pain in the neck and shut up and leave us alone and all that. So you had this broken arm and it eventually healed, but this is about as far as you can lift it. You can't go like this, you can't go like this. And you'd kind of like to play tennis, and you'd kind of like to have a little bit more mobility. Well, now what? Well, you can live angry. I'm so angry. My parents neglected me and they didn't do anything when I broke my arm. And look, I'm deformed now. I can't use my arm. Or you can go to the doctor and say, what can I do about my arm? It's limited. And he takes an x-ray and he says, wow, you had a bad break as a kid. Didn't you ever get it fixed? No. What can I do about it now? Well, we could do surgery. I could probably put a couple pins in here and you probably get this much range of motion. Would that be helpful? Yeah. And maybe it would. Maybe I could, play racquetball or pickleball or ping pong or something. I'd have more use of this. My responsibility, not my fault, my responsibility to take ownership of my arm and to grow it as wide and as big as God allows with the medical help that's available to me, instead of staying stuck and victimized. It's your fault, I'm this way. So that's where your husband is. And that's why I talk about sanity. And that's why we talk about sanity so much in the Conquer Journey, because you're not changing if you don't see you need to, and that you have the power to take responsibility and do that work. And so, yeah, people hurt us. We get raped, we get robbed. What are we going to do with that pain? Here's another way to write it, another way to think about it. I'm a great metaphor person, so I'm always making word pictures because I think they're easy to remember. So if you're writing a story, if you're an author and you're writing a novel about you, your life story, all right, you can't control the scene necessarily. So the scene is God opens and says, okay, here's your chapter. You're going through a horrible time in your marriage. Your husband doesn't love you anymore. That's the scene. Now make the story. How does your main character handle that? What does she do about that? How does she get through that? Does she get through that trusting God and growing through that and becoming all that she can be? Or does she get through that by retaliating and paying back evil for evil? Those are your choices to make. We can't always control the circumstances of our life, but we do write the story. And when we don't take ownership from that and say, well, you made me act that way, it's just not the truth. It's not the truth. And if we don't own that, even as victims, we own how we handle our victimization. If I am robbed tomorrow or raped tomorrow, I'm going to be traumatized for sure. And I'm going to be sitting in a heap for a while. But am I going to grow through that? Am I going to get stronger from that? Am I going to learn something about that? Or am I going to just be ruined for the rest of my life? God says, no, don't do that. All things work together for your good if you allow it. I just became friends with Rachel Del Hollander. She's the woman who outed the doctor from the Olympic that thing. She's the one that was on CNN, the Christian, who gave her testimony about forgiveness and all that. She's an amazing woman, and she's on this Southern Baptist convention thing with me, or committee with me. And she's got an amazing story because she's sexually abused as a child, as an athlete. Nobody believed her. And even her church didn't believe her when she went to them, or they made her feel guilty for outing the doctor because she was just looking for publicity, which wasn't true. She just wanted to tell the truth, and she wanted to get justice. And so this is really important, that she took what happened to her and she did good with it. She's helping other people with it. She's trying to change laws with it. So she's not just a victim. She's also a conqueror. And God tells us we are more than conquerors. And so that's the mindset that I work with you if you join Conquer with me, because I want you, if you might be in the worst marriage ever, and I've heard a lot of worst marriage ever stories, but you have the opportunity here to become who God called you to be. And God says, not only is he the light of the world, but you're the light of the world. And if you've let your husband snuff your candle out, shame on you, don't let him. He doesn't have that right, and he doesn't have that power. And you've got to figure out what you need to do to be the person that God's called you to be. And I would love to help you with that process in Conquer. Do I tell him when he reminds me repeatedly of my unfaithfulness? Do you tell him what? What do I tell him? Okay. I think I wouldn't tell him anything. What I might say is, what is it that, why are you doing that? Like, what is it that you need to do by doing that? What's not finished for you in this? What do you need to happen in order for you to be able to let go of this? It happened 15 years ago and you're stuck. We're stuck in Groundhog Day. It's like, I don't want to live in Groundhog Day anymore. This happened 15 years ago. What do you need to do to move on? So I wouldn't tell him anything, but I might ask him a question that would invite him to self-reflect. Like, oh, yeah, it sort of does feel like Groundhog Day. Why am I doing this? And I'm not saying he will, but that would be your best shot at moving out of Groundhog Day. And then have a boundary. I think I've talked about this. I've been willing to go to counseling. I've not done it since. I've been faithful for 15 years. I'm not willing to discuss this anymore. And there's your boundary. All right. After years of counseling at different churches, he has manipulated me and pastors, and I have stopped all counseling, and we are separated in-house. I want to file for legal separation. We live in my parents' house. This mess is creating division in my family. He won't leave my church. He won't leave. My church wants me to give biblical grounds for legal separation. Can you help? The book will help give you some biblical grounds for separation. So I would definitely join Conquer and download the book and get the support you need to help you and get the legal information that you might need. So here's, Esther, one of the things that I think you, as well as everybody in the situation, the truth is, not every church agrees on the definition of when the line is crossed that you can end a marriage. All right. Some really conservative churches, such as John Piper's church, would say never. You can never end a marriage. You can separate, but you can never end a marriage, ever. And other churches would see it different. So you need to come to a place that whether you stay or whether you leave, somebody's going to disapprove. Right? It's just going to be the way. You stay in an abusive marriage, you're going to think you're crazy and you're, codependent, or you're not mentally well, or all that. And you leave and you're unbiblical and you're ungodly and you should be willing to suffer for Jesus. You're just not going to get 100% approval rating. But guess what? You're in fine company, because Jesus didn't get 100% approval rating either. And he was perfect and you're not. So I think that one of the things that we teach in Conquer is for you to learn to think for yourself. Because you see, when you've been in one of these controlling relationships where your husband does your thinking for you, or you're not allowed to think anymore, and you sort of shut that part of your brain off, now what you do is you start deferring to other people who maybe are more benevolent, like your church. What should I do? And even people are asking me, what should I do? I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your life. You've got to figure it out. That's your responsibility to do. I'll guide you on how to do that. But you see, part of being a mature adult is you make that decision. Your church doesn't make that decision. You do before the Lord, because guess what? Your church doesn't have to stand before the Lord about that. You do. And so you have to be before the Lord and ask him what he wants for you. And some women have gotten very clear directions. Time to go. God cares about oppression, and he cares about deceit, and he cares about abuse, and he cares about women. And God does not value the sanctity of marriage more than the safety and the sanity in it. So the ebook that we'll give you as a bonus for Being and Conquer is full of information. I think it's, when do you separate? Why do you separate? Biblical guidelines for separating. How do you separate if you're going to separate? What do you need to ask your lawyer generally? And then if you find a lawyer, how do you find a good one? What questions do you need to ask to make sure you have a good one? What questions do you need to ask about all different categories like children and separation and money? One of the things that churches don't talk about is, so for example, the John Pipers of the world who say, you can separate, but you can't divorce ever. It's against God. So what that does, it puts women in, and I'm, if you separate forever and it works for you and it's safe to do that, I'm not against that. I think that is a perfectly acceptable option. The problem is, in our country, you have no legal protection in most states financially if you do that. So states, and we talk about this in the book, states don't get involved in your money if you're married. It's only when you file for divorce that states say something about that. And so if you have a husband who's been unfaithful financially or irresponsible financially, and you are separated from them, but you're not legally separated, the law doesn't get involved in how those monies are spent. So he can cash in his retirement, he can spend all your savings, and even though half that money is legally yours, you have no access to it because he's never given you any access to it. And so he's drained everything, he's racked up credit card bills, he's not paid income taxes, and you're responsible for half of all that, even though you didn't do any of it because you're partners, you're married. And so that's where I think the churches have fallen down in being realistic in that, don't ever separate it. Okay, so let's say you don't. You follow your church's advice and you never you separate, but you never get divorced. And he drains every single penny that you guys have saved together and he spends it all. And you're 60 years old and you have no money until retirement or until you get your Social Security. And even that's going to be very little. Is your church going to pay your bills? Is your church going to support you for that? Because they told you not to use the law to protect yourself financially? No. Now what? So you got to think through these things, and Conquer helps you do that. That book will help you do some of that. And then you got to come to a decision about what you think God's calling you to do now. All right. What's my opinion on sexual addiction? Is that the question? There's a debate on whether it's a real addiction. Thoughts? So I do think that we can become dependent and then addicted to something in our life because God has said that we are whatever we love controls us, right? And so we think we have the freedom to say no, and all of a sudden we don't have freedom to say no. Galatians, it says, whoever's caught in a trespass, you don't have the freedom to get out. So I think there is some biblical support for how we've been wired, and that we have, some of us even more so than others, a tendency to get addicted to certain things, whether it's addicted to drugs or alcohol or certain substances. Sugar even is very addictive because it makes us feel good. And so that reward, that dopamine hit, even, this is becoming addictive. You check your email, you get a good email, and that hit, I want to see more, I want to get more of that. And so I do think that our brains and our bodies are wired for that. But that doesn't mean that you're not responsible. Okay, so I think that that's the problem with addiction. That I say that, so if I knew an alcoholic and I said, well, I have a problem. I'm an addict and it's not my fault. And so now it's not my fault. So what? It's not my responsibility to take care of that. It's not my responsibility to get help for that. It's not my responsibility for how much I drink or what I do when I drink. That's the craziness in our culture. So I might have a problem, and whether you call it addiction or sin problem, whatever, I'm still responsible. And if I'm addicted to something and I don't want to be, there are steps to break free of that addiction, which includes abstinence, right? And some people don't want to go that direction, so they can make excuses and blame. But I do think that just like sexual addiction and alcohol addiction or drug addiction or other addictions can grab a hold of us and catch us and keep us in its grasps, God says that we have the ability to break free. But it's not a matter of just an easy woo-woo prayer and we're done. We've got work to do, even the way we think, right? And so that's why I said, don't think your husband's changing with some sort of quick fix. There's an interesting story in the book of Second Kings. I was going to use it in the PowerPoint, and then I thought it's too long already. So, but go and read it. It's an interesting story, and I use this when I worked with men who were abusive or addicted. And it's a story about Naaman. Remember when he had leprosy? And Elisha, he worked for another king, and he was a warrior, a sergeant or whatever they call him, in the army, and he developed leprosy. And one of the Israelite slave girls that they had said, well, I know there's a man in Israel who can cure you. Why don't you go over there? So he got his papers, and he goes to the king of Israel and says, I hear you can cure me. And he goes, I can't cure you, but Elisha can. Go over to his house, and he'll cure you. So Naaman goes over to Elisha, and he knocks on the door. And Elisha never even answers, and so he says, Elisha, I heard you're a man of God and you can cure me. You can fix my problem. And Elisha says, go wash in the Jordan River, dunk yourself there 7 times. Don't bother me, basically. And he goes, what? How dare you not come to the door? Why aren't you just going to pray for me, Elisha? I don't want to have to go to the dirty Jordan River. I can go to my own river. So he refused Elisha's treatment plan, right? He knew better. He was arrogant. He wasn't willing to learn. He wasn't willing to be taught. He wasn't willing to be submissive, right? So we see this arrogance. And the same thing with an abuser, an addict. They're not doing the treatment plan. 7 times he's got a dip, not just one. There's some work involved. There's repeated patterns that have to happen in order for you to cure yourself of your leprosy, in order for God to heal you. And so it's an illustration of the changes. And so in the teaching that I do on this, there's 7 dips of healing for an abusive man, 7 dips of changes for an addict of what they have to go through. And it's not a one-time done, hey, just say a prayer for me and I'm better. No, it's work. It's work because you got yourself into this pattern, and we're creatures of habit. Any habit, you've got to work to get yourself out of that habit. My husband was the most indifferent person I'd ever met. How do I come to a place where I believe this is biblical grounds for divorce? I don't know can you get my Bible for me? And I'm going to see if I can find a passage. I don't know if I can find that passage right now, but let me see if I can. There's a real interesting passage in the Old Testament. I think it's in Deuteronomy 24 or Exodus 24. I don't know if I'll be able to find it quick, but I'll just tell you about it, and then you can probably Google and find it. So I'll give you the cliff notes of it. It says something like this. If a slave wife is married to a man and he marries another woman, so this is a slave wife, not even a real wife, like it's a slave wife. So she's lower status wife, like a concubine wife, right? If a slave wife is married to a man and he marries another woman and her husband neglects his marital duties for support, sexual fulfillment, and care or something else, basics, she can leave him. Now, this is God talking to a slave wife. And one of the things I said, somebody brought the passages up, God doesn't allow divorce and God hates divorce and all that. And again, churches differ on this. And so do your due diligence. I'm just one person. But it's easy to kind of pull these verses out of context. And what I said to her is that, God allowed for divorce. He didn't hate all divorce. And so you're going to have to wrestle with, does God allow for divorce? And does the passage on breaking covenant mean he didn't keep his marital promises? So is adultery, when Jesus says adultery is the grounds for divorce, is adultery a metaphor for breaking covenant, right? Because God used the word adultery when Israel broke covenant with him, right? And he said, I'm going to divorce you in Jeremiah. Right? Now, Israel didn't literally commit adultery with intercourse, but adultery was used as the word. You're whoring around with other nations. You're prostituting yourself. He uses sexual words. And he says, you've committed adultery with me. Now, it was literal. It was figurative. And so when Jesus uses the word adultery, is it the literal, unless a man has intercourse with another woman, you may not leave? Or is that word meant to be a picture of unfaithfulness to the marital covenant, breaking covenant again and again, even with no repentance? How can you repair a relationship when there is no relationship? Right? So let's see if I can find this. Hold on. And if I can't, you can look it up. I mean, we don't have to waste a lot of time doing that. But nope, I can't find it. Quickly. So if you want to email me it, I'll look for it and I'll tell you it. But anyway, so what I'm saying is that when God says I hate divorce, he's not saying I hate all divorce in Malachi. He's saying I hate a certain kind of divorce. It's called a treacherous divorce. The NIV translates it. And he's saying, I hate when a man treacherously divorces a wife and throws her away like a used tissue for a younger model. Right? He's breaking covenant with the wife of his youth for no good reason, but just because. And not only that, but he throws her away. And what it means in that passage is he doesn't even really legally divorce her. He just leaves her. So that leaves her in a really vulnerable position in that culture, because women couldn't just go get a job, or, women couldn't even divorce their husbands. So they were very vulnerable in that culture. And a lot of the rules about marriage are really to protect women. And so when he says, I hate when you do that, he doesn't even give her a legal divorce that she could go marry another man and have him take care of her. So he just throws her out and leaves her destitute to beg or prostitute herself. It's a horrible place for him to leave a woman. That's what he hated. Not every kind of divorce. But you're going to have to do your own homework and decide what the Bible is saying to you about the sin of indifference. And again, here's the bigger picture. Does it glorify God for you to stay in a relationship and lie and pretend? It's something different than what it is. There is no relationship. With the sin of indifference, it's saying, I don't care about you at all. I don't care enough about you to talk to you, to give you any energy, to give you any resources, to give you any time, money for your care or well-being. What kind of marriage is that? But you have to think through that and pray through that. All right. How are we doing? I would love to continue our work together and to continue this conversation. If you found this helpful, I do this a lot with Conquer Women on our phone calls. And we do this a lot in our videos. And we do this some in the Facebook page. And I'm in there typing and helping you and talking to you. And I have coaches in my Conquer membership who are helping women as well. People who have been trained by me, so that it's not just me in there, because it can be kind of crowded sometimes and you want to be heard. And so I just would encourage you to try it and see, because it's been great. It's been really an amazing thing. And maybe it's not for everybody. If you don't want to talk and you don't want to be honest and you don't want to be connected and you want to just be all by yourself, then that's probably not a good fit for you. But if you are tired of being by yourself and you're tired of not having anybody understand, and you are tired of wandering and not having any direction and not having any mentors who can help steer you in good directions and help you grow, if you need that, Conquer is perfect for you. So I would love to talk to you on Friday for people who sign up today. And again, not a big risk. $27 is not a huge investment to see if something is amazing. But it's not really the $27. It's you getting involved. So as soon as you sign up, you got to get into the membership site. You've got to get used to using that technology if you're not used to it. Sign up, log in, look around, start watching the videos, start your Conquer journey. So you're investing yourself. It's not a magic pill. It's a course. It's a community. It's a educational support group that some women have been in for years, because it gives them that community that they have longed for, of someone who gets their life and is not giving them some platitudes and some trivial statements that make no sense in their context. Again, just one more thing before I go. The lady who was talking this afternoon in the Conquer group about, God hates divorce and all that. The Bible is written in a context, and we have to understand the context. And even there's some Conquer videos in the library about how to discern the context and how to discern what God's really saying. Because people have distorted the Bible for years and can make it say whatever they want it to say. You hear this in the headship and submission passages, or, that God's a bully and God's going to send you to hell if you don't, if you are nice to a homosexual, forget it, you're going to hell too. It's terrible stuff. And God doesn't say any of that, but they can twist certain scriptures to make it sound like he says that. And so you have to really read the Bible, and you have to know the context. Who's God talking to? Why is he saying this? And so what I said to the woman today is, so since the Bible says that you should obey your master if you're a slave, and you should obey your master if you were working with a woman who was sex trafficked and she was a slave, is that what you would tell her? Or is there a different context now? And do we need to think differently? That the Bible was written in a context and was trying to help people in that context. And maybe the context isn't always the same in every situation. And if you were a slave and you had a chance not to be, would it be okay to escape? Would it be okay to run away? I think so. And so, but you have to think for yourself about the heart of God and the will of God, and not just all one sentence. You got to put it together. And that's why it's important for you to read your Bible and to know what the Bible says so that you can know God and know the heart of God. All right. So we've been together for a little over 7:30, 2 hours, I guess. So I hope you join me in Conquer, and I will hopefully talk to you on Friday. I'm losing my mind here. It's been a long day. I'm getting tired. So I'm going to go for now, and God bless. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and take care. See you in Facebook. I'm going to be on Facebook tomorrow. So come to Facebook Live on the regular Facebook page, and we'll unpack some more of this if you have some more questions, but it's more public there. So be careful. All right. God bless. Bye-bye.